Now the tabernacle, you look at the picture there, you see side where it's got the tabernacle and all these tents around it. Well, that's the children traveled. Remember, they traveled, and they traveled 40 days. They were just wandering in sin. They were in rebellion. But every time they traveled, and when they set up camp, they put the tabernacle was in the center of the camp. And the children of Israel had each tribe had a certain place to set up their tents. So they had to set up in order. So there was some order to this. And so they set up around this tent. Now see the tabernacle, what's called the tabernacle, it has three parts. Okay? There's the outer court and the holy place and the Holy of Holies. Now, I think down your outline you have the little diagram, and it kind of shows the Holy of Holies and the holy place. But in your color diagram here, this fence is basically a cloth fence with supports to it. So that what's inside there, you'll see it as you look down. You'll see the outer court. Now this outer court is approximately 150 feet by 75 feet wide, and the fence is about 7.5 feet tall. Okay, so inside that outer court, then you see that other little structure in there. It has two compartments. One side is called the holy place. The bigger side is called the holy place. And then the smaller one that's in white, as you see there, it's called the Holy of Holies. Okay? So let's look at that. I'll give you some details on that. Okay, in the outer court, a curtain enclosure. And note it has a wide gate. Now, something to remember about this gate. This gate was always set up on the eastern side. Okay? So if you looked at this, you look at your picture there, if you picture north, the top part of that as being north, and then so the east, you see that opening there that's called the gate. There's only one way to get in, only one way to get inside this tabernacle. And there's only one way. Christ is only one way into heaven. There's only one mediator between God and men. Okay, that's Christ Jesus. So even that door, it's a type of Christ. Only one way to get in. It was on the eastern side. And when the Jews went inside the tabernacle, they were facing west. Now think about this. The religions of the world, the false religions of the world, when they bow down, when the Muslims bow down, they bow down facing the east because they are worshiping the sun god of the east. When the Israelites were worshiping, they faced the west. They entered in toward the west, okay? And so I believe there's significance there. I believe the significance is the first commandment in Genesis chapter 20 and verse 3. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And so the children of Israel, they walked inside to present their sacrifices, okay? Inside there, you'll see two things. You look at your picture, you'll see that little, it's called the brazen altar. And that altar was where animals were sacrificed. So you had to bring your sacrifices in there, perfect sacrifices. Now, I don't have time, but you got to read Exodus. You ought to spend some time this week in Exodus. Because you could bring a lamb, or you could bring a goat. But you could go all the way down to bring a little pigeon. I mean, it was for the sacrifice. Not everyone could afford a lamb. Not everyone could afford a goat. But a pigeon, anyone could afford a pigeon. You see, God makes it, His salvation is for everyone. Everyone has an ability to come before Him. Okay? So here they brought their sacrifices in. The sacrifices were given to the priest. The priest made the sacrifice here at the altar. Okay? And then the priest went up to The next thing there is the laver, the brazen laver. It's where water was kept for the priest to clean. He would clean his hands and his feet. Now, at the altar, the brazen altar, when the blood was shed, that's a type of salvation. Okay, salvation cleanses us all over. But when they went down to the laver was just for the hands and the feet. It's a type of our walk to cleanse ourselves. You see, once we get saved, we're cleansed from all sin. But daily we have to cleanse ourselves daily. Not salvation daily. We don't have to get saved again. If we confess our sin, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sin. Not to the preacher, not to the priest, you confess them to the Lord. Don't tell your best friend. Long if you tell them all your sin, by the way. Confess your faults one to another. Be very specific, but don't be telling all the nitty-gritty. You confess that to God and forsake it. Okay? Okay. Now let's go. Okay, so now, then that's the outer court. The brazen altar, the brazen laver. And then you go into that holy place. You go into, there's the door. And by the way, this door, the door, that opening there, it was a white cloth. And white speaks of the purity. It's a type of Christ. The door is a type of Christ. The door was white, speaks of His purity. It had some thread, 3 colors of thread. I think I give you the colors. They were His royalty. Okay, and see, scarlet, purple, and I think it was going to be gold. Let's see what it says. I've got it in my notes somewhere. The threads, let's see. Okay, the blue, it speaks of, He's from, it was wood overlaid with brass. Wood speaks of His humanity, and brass speaks of judgment. And so in his human form, He was judged for our sin. Everything about this, everything, the way the tabernacle was set up, the way it was made, it all speaks of Jesus Christ. On this, this tabernacle, see the tabernacle, and you see the different layers of cloth that were there. That's all significant too, the different layers of cloth. It all speaks of the life of Christ. Inside the holy place, the priest could go in there. Different priests could go into the holy place. Okay? But there was another curtain that was inside the holy place that was called the veil. And no priest could go beyond the veil. And only the high priest, Aaron, could go beyond the veil one time a year on one special day. It was the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. He could go in there one day, and when he went in, he first had to take in an offering, a blood offering, and sprinkle it. There was a box in there called the Ark of the Covenant. And in that box, there were some memorial things in that box. You have a little hope chest at home maybe, or a little something, and you keep some things that remind you of something. Well, inside there was 3 things. There was a pot of manna to remind the children of Israel of God's provision for them. God looks after their needs. And then there was the commandments, okay, to remind them of their sinfulness and God's holiness. And then there was Aaron's rod. He had a miracle rod, and with that rod, God gave him special power. That was to remind them of the power of God. That was inside this box called the Ark of the Covenant. On top of this box was covered with gold. It was called the mercy seat. And so the priest would go in with the blood, and he would sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat. And the first blood he had to put in there was for his own sin. Because even the high priest Aaron, we know he was a sinner. He put up he put up an idol and had to be rebuked for it. If somebody walks around and calls themselves infallible, how foolish is that? How foolish is any man sitting on a throne somewhere saying that he's infallible? How gullible would somebody think that somebody could set themselves up as some kind potentate and be infallible. There's only one person that was infallible, and he's already in heaven. Okay? Now, okay. See if my blood pressure's okay. Okay, all right. Okay, all right. Okay, so the high priest went in and he sprinkled blood on the mercy seat. That blood was for his own sin. And then he had to go in and get blood, more blood. He brought in the blood that represented the sins of the people. And he sprinkled that blood on the mercy seat. And, wow. I don't even describe it here. It'll be described in a different portion of the Bible. But the priestly garments. The priest had bells on his garment. And he moved around in there because there was a possibility that if the priest went in there in an unholy way, God would kill him inside there. And they couldn't go in to get him. They would just listen to see if they heard the bells, see if he was still alive. And he sprinkled blood for his sin. He sprinkled blood for their sin. And then if God accepted that blood, if God accepted that, that blood and said, okay, this is going to satisfy me for their righteousness, to forgive their sins, then the Shekinah glory, it's called, or the glory of God would come down in a cloud, and that cloud would fill that holy place, the Holy of Holies. And that would be the sign that God had forgiven them. And so now the priests could go out and they would rejoice that their sins had been forgiven. And now another year went by, and day by day they would come into the outer court. Day by day they would come and offer sacrifices for sins. Every day the priests are in there on the brazen altar, and they're in there sacrificing sins and taking blood into the holy place. But only one time a year could they go into the Holy of Holies. But remember, when Jesus Christ died, the Bible says in Matthew chapter 27 that the veil was ripped. That veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go in, that veil was rent from the top to the bottom. If it was ripped from the bottom, it would have been man ripping it open. But God ripped it open from the top to the bottom, and now that way, now there's no high priest has to go in and represent us. But we have the opportunity ourselves to come boldly to the throne of grace, okay? And so we no longer need a high priest. We have our high priest has already opened up the veil and the way for us, Jesus Christ. Okay. I've said a lot. Hope I haven't confused you. Moses, 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in exile in Midian, and 40 years in the wilderness journey. This Moses... A lot about Moses in this book. Keep this. I will say this. If you have questions about anything, you write out the question. Mike, you have to answer all these questions. Mike can answer them, or I'll try to answer them. I know this is a lot, but I think this will give us, now now we all know, okay, what's in the book of Exodus. Okay, Mark, what do you got? There you go. There's 40 chapters. 40 is the number of testing. Moses was tested in the wilderness. Okay, he was tested in exile. And so 40 is the number of testing. Okay, that is interesting. Okay, I wish I'd have thought of it. I'd have said that. Okay, glad you did. Okay, Lord bless you. Genesis, Exodus. What's going to be next week? Leviticus. Oh my goodness, I've already spent about 5 hours in Leviticus, and I've just started, and it's wearing me out. Pray for Leviticus, okay? Pray for